This series of lectures has also been deliberately termed as Crime and Punishment because I feel that law and literature are very deeply linked. Now, this title draws from a very famous book written by a great author by the name of Fyodor Dostoevsky, wherein in that particular novel, Dostoevsky essentially looks into the mind and also portrays the kind of reactions which the person has in relation to a crime that he committed. It is a book which I would recommend most of you to read. It is set in earlier times in Russia, but definitely because what I'm going to deal with now, thereafter, here on, after having briefly summarized what I have said, will relate to what are the elements of a crime. I will begin with that. And in relation to the elements of a crime, when I say that, what is that book? That book I am also insistent that you people read because it talks about the mind of that person. So there is a clue in relation to what I am going to talk about. The clue is this, that it is the mind or the state of mind which is one of the major or main elements in relation to a crime. Now, when I say that, in criminology, a period of time, this state of mind, and especially the guilty state of mind, has been given a connotation, or a attribution, and it is called in criminal law as mens rea. So the first element is a guilty state of mind. Without a guilty state of mind or an evil intent, if I could so say so, there can be no offense. Now, this is the first element. In a crime, what I call as a crime equation, an equation, when you see an equation, there will be two aspects which will join up to form something else. A square plus B square is equal to so and so. You must have read when you were in school. A plus B into A minus B is equal to so and so. So likewise, in crime, if crime is the resultant product, the two things which combine to it would be one, an evil intent, mens rea, coupled with actus reus or the physical element, the act. Now the physical element also I dealt with a little bit in the last occasion when I spoke about offenses. What is an offense? When I spoke about that, it embodied the physical aspect of it, where I spoke about acts and omissions. So there will be acts and omissions which will comprise the physical aspect of it, which is the actus reus. So therefore, to combine and form a crime equation, you need these two aspects to concur, to exist or coexist at the same point of time. And that is that there should be a guilty mind or with an evil intent, and it should combine with an actus reus or an act or omission. An act which is forbidden by law, or something which law enjoins you to do, but you do not do that, which amounts to an omission. These two things, when they combine together, will bring the resultant product of a crime. So having spoken about this broadly, because these are concepts, jurisprudential concepts or juridical concepts which developed over a period of time. Interestingly, I do not know whether Aditya has joined. Is Aditya there? Has Aditya joined from Patna?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, I'm there.
He's there. So interestingly, Aditya shared a very interesting book with me a few days back. It was written way back during British times by an Indian. by the name of Shamsul Huda. Aditya, you remember Shamsul Huda? You
Yes,
shared
sir.
that book with me.
Yes, sir.
So while reading Shamsul Huda, I discovered, interestingly, that in the early 13th century, in Europe, especially in a place like Paris, you see, there was a punishment rendered to a pig for having eaten a child. You see, the punishment that was rendered to the pig was that the pig was burnt alive because the pig had the temerity to eat a small child. There was another instance which was quoted in it, where in England, a horse for having caused injury to a person on a walkway was killed. Meaning whereby that animals were essentially punished for the crimes which were apparently committed by them. Now here is a scenario where, why I gave this example? Because here is an example where there is no mens rea involved. You cannot make out the evil intent or a guilty mind in relation to an animal. So from there, the law essentially made a progress thereafter and brought about this concept of an mens rea, of a guilty mind or an evil intent. Today, supposing, Aditya, I know that you have a lot of dogs as pets in your home. Supposing one of your dog decides to bite somebody who comes, the neighbor. I do not think our laws today will punish the dog. But the law will definitely punish you. It will be attributable to you in terms of being rash or in terms of being negligent.
Yes, sir.
So that is the kind of progress which we have seen over a period of time. And that is how the concept of mens rea, which has come up, manages to discern from between man and beast, if I could say so. Now, going a little further, interestingly, the elements of a crime which I am talking of, though the crime equation talks about only two aspects, and the crime equation talks about the presence of a mens rea, an evil intent, coupled with that of actus reus to commit a crime, there are two more aspects which become relevant. And this aspect becomes relevant, and I would also say would constitute the element of a crime, because when we ask a question to ourselves, as to who is it that who is committing that crime, number one. The person who is committing that crime, one, there will be a requirement of a human being who will be having that culpable element, the mental element. Coupled with these two factors, there is the third aspect as to the act which is being done by that said human being. By that act, whether injury is being caused to another. So therefore, these two elements also join in along with the basic equation to form the elements of a crime, is how I look at it from various sources that I have managed to pour into. So let us take, to begin with, the first aspect. That is why I gave that example of animals being tried. I gave the example of animals being held culpable, not tried, culpable. Culpable despite the fact that there was no mens rea. So from there, we have come down to the fact that there is the requirement of a human being. Now, when we talk about the human being should be one by whom the act in question should be done. The act or omission in question should be done. which means that the human being is under a legal obligation to act in a particular manner, as I had earlier defined, that either there should be an act or an omission, a legal omission. Law should enjoin that he should be doing something in a particular way and he should be omitting that, or the law should forbid from the doing of a particular act. And the second thing which is important in relation to this particular element of the human being is that he should be fit in such a manner to be subject to receiving a punishment. Because no offense is complete without a punishment being enjoined to it. So therefore, becomes important. Now the Indian Penal Code, if you people will for a minute read section 2 with me, there are two provisions, 2 and section 11, which will further the cause of what I am discussing with you guys. When we come to section 2 will talk about the definition clause, and especially we go to the definition of 2n. It says offense means an act or omission made punishable by any law for the time being in force, and includes any act in respect of which a complaint may be made under section 20 of the Cattle Trespass Act. We are not concerned with the Cattle Trespass Act at the moment, but we are talking about this aspect. Now, then we come to WA for a minute. Victim means a person who has suffered any loss or injury caused by reason of the act or omission for which the accused person has been charged, and the expression victim includes his or her guardian or legal heir. So now this includes both the concepts which I was talking of. Initially, the presence of a human being to commit the said act, and 2, the fourth aspect, that there should be somebody by reason of the said act an injury is being caused to the same. But when we look at these two provisions, you will find that both the provisions talk in terms of a person. It does not talk in terms of a human being. Section 11, when we go to, section 11 talks about this person that is being referred to out here. When you look at section 11, person. According to the other act of CRPC, even in relation to IPC, I'm going to IPC for a minute. 2 talks about every person shall be liable to punishment under this code, and not otherwise for every act or omission contrary to the provisions thereof, which he shall be guilty within. So here again it is talking about a person, and when we talk in terms of 11, it says the word person includes any company or association or body of persons, whether incorporated or not. It's an inclusive definition which includes a corporation within the definition of a person. So therefore, we move on to a very interesting and an important aspect when we deal with this person who is an artificial or a juridical person. Because the definition not only includes human beings, the definition also includes artificial persons or juridical persons here, where it is specifically talking in terms of a company. 11, where it says the person includes any company or association or body of persons, whether incorporated or not. It includes all the association of persons and also includes a body corporate, which means a company, essentially. So now, since I defined, to begin with, before I started, I talked about the elements which will constitute a crime. I had said that apart from the crime equation, I had also spelled out the requirement of a human being, and I had also spelled out the requirement of a human being at the other end of the spectrum, where the effect of what this person would do would be seen in relation to the injury caused by him to some other person. So now, when I'm talking about this, here is a scenario where the act contemplates an artificial person as well. Now, what does this bringing in of an artificial person do to the concept as such? The concept meaning that of mens rea and actus reus in the crime equation. Now that is what I intend examining just in the present part. What was the view to begin with? Because this essentially I had also dealt with yesterday in the previous lecture, that the Indian Penal Code essentially has also been drawn a lot from the common law of England as and when it developed over a period of time. So most of the manner in which the Indian Penal Code developed was that because common law is something which is not codified. It develops in relation to the requirement of the times. It develops over a period of time. So since it is not codified, the advantage that Lord Macaulay had at that point of time when he drafted these provisions was that there was an entire body of common law which was available, and the better parts of that body, he decided to embody it within this legislation. Now, how he has done it is also something which will be a part of this narrative as it goes on. So without digressing, so therefore one has to look into the scenario in relation to this aspect. Why did this get incorporated here? We go back to the common law. In relation to the body corporates, how it developed over a period of time. And when I deal with this, interestingly, you will find reflections of what the Supreme Court did, something which the English courts were grappling with way back in, if I remember correctly, in 1922. It goes back to that point of time. And then subsequently developing itself in 1944. We find in 2019 or 18, the Indian Supreme Court still grappling with the said concepts. Not that there is any amount of clarity which has been developed to a fine extent in English law, but to a great extent in their conditions, they manage with that. But we are still in the realm of confusion is what I would say in this lecture. So now let us just examine. The initial position as far as these body corporates or these corporations or these companies were concerned was that an artificial person or a body corporate or a company cannot incur criminal liability. And why? Let us test it in relation to the crime equation which we had talked about. The reasons are obvious. That one, a corporation or an artificial person does not have a physical form, a physical body like the human being. Now, why do you need a physical body? Because that is where I had spoken a little earlier, that as far as an offense is concerned, an offense will be committed only when it can be in a position for a punishment to be accorded. You cannot imprison an artificial person. Can you send any company to jail? Obviously, you cannot. So the first requirement that the physical presence of the company cannot be secured. This was an interesting scenario wherein a very interesting case came up before the English courts. And this judgment was by the name of R versus Daily Mirror Newspaper Limited. Daily Mirror is a very famous newspaper which is still published in London. So the first case came up in relation to this. And look at the reasoning and how common law gets applied, and then subsequently it leads to the development of other law. What had happened was that this company was being tried, this newspaper, which is a body corporate, was being tried. They said that an offense has been committed by this body corporate, and therefore this body corporate needs to be tried for the same. Now, when this came up before the court said that now there is an indictment, for an indictment, or which means there is an offense which has been committed according to the case of the prosecution. There was something, so therefore, this particular corporation has to be committed for trial. In India, of course, we do not have a concept where there is a committal for trial. In that sense, these words are not used. But these words were there in the statute which had been legislated in the laws of England at that point of time. And still date, they have that any person who commits an offense has to be committed for a trial. Now, when this came up, the judges felt that they have to look into the meaning of these words, committed for trial. So there was something at that point of time, there was a statute in relation to that called the Interpretation Statute or Interpretation Act, which was passed in 1889. Now, as far as the Interpretation Act was concerned, the Interpretation Act said that committal for trial would mean committal to prison for the purposes of a trial. Committal for trial would be equivalent to committal to prison so that the person could be tried by a jury or by a judge. So in that kind of a scenario, they said that an artificial person which does not have a physical presence cannot be committed to prison. So if it cannot be committed to prison, a trial cannot be held against it. So this was the first important case which came up at that point of time, and the year was 1922. If you people wish to read the case otherwise and go a little more into it, the citation would be 1922, volume 2, KB, which means King's Bench. And the page number in that citation is 530. Where you will find this logic. By this logic, they came to the conclusion that a corporate cannot be tried. Now, interestingly, when this happens, I go on to the second aspect. So the first aspect was that there is no physical body as such to which punishment can be accorded, no imprisonment can be given. The second aspect was that a corporation does not have a mind of its own. So if a corporation does not have a mind of its own, I am talking about the position in England at that point of time. If a corporation does not have a mind of its own, the first limb of that criminal equation, mens rea, cannot be satisfied. So if cannot be satisfied, if there is no mens rea, there is no evil intent which can be ascribed to the corporation, then the corporation cannot be tried. This was coupled with a third aspect. The third aspect was that when a corporation or a company acts, it acts through the acts of its servants and agents. So when it is acting through its servants and agents, the acts of servants and agents, if they happen to be criminally liable, then as far as criminal law is concerned, vicarious liability cannot be attributed. Meaning whereby that for an act which Varun does by breaking the finger of Aditya in a wrestling match, which normally is held in my office, that criminal liability cannot be attributed to a third person, if at all the act was criminal. So that concept, keeping that concept that vicarious liability is alien to criminal law, so therefore Any act which is cannot be attributed to the company. So therefore, no liability, no criminal liability as far as the corporation is concerned. Now you will find why I am saying, going into a little bit of detail here, is that subsequently you will find how all this comes into play and how it all gets confused in further into a mixture, a very interesting mixture, which we will deal with a little later when we talk about two cases which now today govern the field of corporate liability as far as our Indian position is concerned. If you people recollect that Iridium and Sunil Bharti Mittal in the Airtel matter, these are the two cases today which are more or less determining the position of law as far as corporate liability in India is concerned. So any one of you who have gone through these judgments at some point of time will find shades of reasoning coming from what I have said just now. Some portions drawn from certain places here and certain places there, which we will deal with a little later. The third aspect, I had already dealt with three. The fourth aspect, where the court said that criminal liability cannot be attributed to a company, is a doctrine. Interestingly, the doctrine also, you will find, has a bearing in relation to what you do when you make a challenge in a writ. It is called the doctrine of ultra vires. Now, the doctrine of about this, that a company or a body corporate there is a confine in which it functions. And that confine in which it functions will relate to only no company will be authorizing anybody to commit a illegal act or commit a criminal act. So therefore, the artificial person cannot be fastened with criminal liability. This was the position at that point of time. Now, how did this position thereafter shift? Now I come to the quantum shift. The quantum shift happens in a very interesting matter. In fact, the quantum shift happens in a matter titled Leonard Carrying Company Limited versus Asiatic Petroleum Company Limited. Now here, for the first time, those concepts came into picture, which we today find a direct bearing or a direct reflection in relation to the Iridium judgment and also in relation to certain aspects of the Airtel judgment. Now, what was it that was laid down in this particular judgment which brought about a quantum shift? Interestingly, this was not a criminal judgment. This essentially was a judgment which was delivered in relation to corporate law, in company law. But interestingly, because it examined the manner in which a company functions, it came and drew certain conclusions. The first conclusion that it drew was that a corporation is an abstract. It has no body or no mind of its own. That was the first principle which it laid down. I can see Vaibhav now. So that was the first principle that it laid down. So being an abstract, it has no mind, it has no body. The second principle which it culled out was that in acting or in directing its will, whenever a company acts, then it acts at the direction or the will of somebody. So therefore, what needs to be seen is that whose will is in operation. Now this directing mind and will of the corporation was termed in this judgment as the very ego and the center of personality of the corporation. And then came the final corollary and the most important corollary, that the fault of the company, civil or criminal, is therefore the fault of the superior officer superior officers or the set of persons who are the directing mind and will of the said corporation. So you need to look and see as to whose will is operating, whose mind is in operation, and that when you identify that, that will be identified as the alter ego of the company. So Aditya and Vaibhav, is it ringing a bell as to from where our Supreme Court, after a century, draws these concepts?
Yes, sir.
So this concept was drawn from this judgment. And this judgment was delivered way back in 1915 or so, in a corporate matter. Because where they said that there can be no criminal liability which can be attributed, still held sway. But this was held, what I am stating now, was held in a company law kind of a petition before the concerned court then, wherein all actions of the company were examined as to who is it by the modus, the offices of who is concerned in relation to driving the company to any particular action which is taken. So this provided the key. Interestingly, though this judgment was delivered way back in 1915, it was applied in England to criminal culpability of companies, this concept of alter ego, by way of a judgment called Rex versus ICR Haulage Limited in 1944. So for the first time, the concept of alter ego was brought into service by the courts of England by way of common law in 1944 in a King's Bench judgment, which you will find 1944 King's Bench 551, where this concept of alter ego was extended to criminal liability. Now, having said this, I move on. Having dealt with these portions, I move on to the next. And that, according to me, we'll have to examine. For a moment, I will skip, because I will come back to Sunil Bharti Mittal and Iridium separately. Broadly, I am just summarizing the scenario for you, wherein the same principle which I have just elucidated was elucidated again by the Honorable Supreme Court in the Iridium matter. Where they more or less came to the conclusion that the alter ego of the company happens to be that of the officers who are responsible for the day-to-day affairs of the company, which included the managing director. Then further, when I will discuss these two judgments more in detail later on, in Sunil Bharti Mittal, a very interesting scenario happened. And this was the 2G case. And what happened in the 2G case was that the learned trial court at that point of time, while dealing with the aspect of charge, had found that one, the company was guilty, and since the company was guilty, the persons who were the alter ego of the company, which would mean the managing director and the others, the other officers, in this case it was just the managing director or the owner of the said company, which happened to be the same, Sunil Bharti Mittal, he would be criminally culpable. For the acts of the company, he would be culpable. So this concept, thereafter in relation to what I had just discussed, was then again dealt with by the Supreme Court, and where the Supreme Court said that it cannot be done in this form. You cannot say that the acts of the company will fasten a vicarious liability on the alter ego of the company, the manner in which this argument has been taken. It can be the other way around, but it cannot be this way around. So therefore, it is fallacious reasoning, and therefore, these persons merit a discharge. So they were discharged. We will deal with these portions in greater detail at a later point of time. And I will also express my reservations in the manner in which this judgment has been reached. That whether this kind of an extreme view can be taken, and whether the law needs further development as far as this is concerned, that will be a topic of discussion a little later. So therefore, now here on, I move to the next aspect, having dealt with this. How much time do I have? How much time do I have?
Sir, you may take 5 more minutes because it's already been an hour, and it might disconnect any moment.
Okay. So then I will briefly deal with some aspects in relation to the Indian Penal Code. You see, interestingly, this word mens rea does not find a mention in the Indian Penal Code anywhere. Have you seen this word anywhere? It is not there. So this is like God. In the Indian Penal Code, you cannot see him, but he is there. So what are his signs? Where do you see God? Let us see that. When you pick up the Indian Penal Code, you will find that he is present everywhere. Bhagwan sab jagah hai. So every provision has got criminal intent to it, because it is the state of mind. So what did Lord Macaulay do? Lord Macaulay, instead of saying mens rea, or instead of leaving mens rea to be determined by the court, as it is done in a common law jurisdiction, decided to include it in every provision by describing that state of mind. So therefore, you will find how it is come, how is God existing here, how is mens rea existing? He is existing, or the mens rea is existing in this form: fraudulently, dishonestly, negligently, rashly, reason to believe. Anything which relates to the mind, that the mind needs to be exercised, is reflection of God in each one of these provisions, or a reflection of mens rea in each one of these provisions. So therefore, mens rea is there in all the provisions in a way. A few provisions, it may not be there. You will not find any mental state being described in a few provisions. And those, in a way, are provisions which I need to deal with as to how the law needs to deal with those. For example, there is 292 and 293. Right? Salacious material. Which most of youngsters normally indulge in reading. So reading is not an offense. But distribution of that material, pornographic material, will be an offense per se. So there is no mens rea there. Now how it is to be dealt with is an aspect which I will deal with in the next lesson, which we will have tomorrow in the next lecture. So that is one part. There is another evidence, because God leaves his signs, they say. He leaves signs. In Christian mythology, they say that he leaves signs. Now you have to identify where those signs are. That sign in relation to mens rea, in the Indian Penal Code, you will find in chapter 4. And what is chapter 4? Chapter 4 is general exceptions. And what are those exceptions? Those exceptions all deal with the state of mind. If this is the state of mind, then the offense will not be culpable. Otherwise, this offense is culpable. I lose my mind, I am a madman at a particular point of time. In a rush of anger, I lose my mind. The McNaughton test says that it is what I do at that point of time. And some junior irritates me, I give him a tight slap. And I lost my mind at that time. I do not know the consequences of my act. I am exempted. Mens rea exempts me. I am exempted from mens rea. So that general exception which is there is the evidence of God. That mens rea is required for an offense. Right, gentlemen? So today's lesson or today's chapter or today's talk, we will conclude at this point of time by saying that we can detect mens rea everywhere in the penal code. And places where it cannot be detected, then what is to be done and how it is to be dealt with will form a part of the narrative in the next aspect, which may be tomorrow or day after.